4 points on an open answer question. What would you have to put on it? What would that look like? They even give you samples of this is a 0, this is a 1, this is a 2, 3, 4. And we show those to the kids. And I think that helps them a lot so they can see what the scorers are looking for. They're more familiar with the test items, and I think that helps them a lot.
And that's something that's, Abby does it with her students, and Katie does it with her students, so that's a practice that we are following. You know, as we become more data savvy, we're using more and more every year, and goal setting is something that's huge for our kids. I did bring you just a sample of NWEA growth that I'll pass out to you after, so that you can see what our students last year looked like from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, and they had just great growth. Just really pleased with it. And I know Carol Barber just sent out a report on some of her students, and their growth is so far above what's expected for the norm for NWEA. So we just continue to set those high goals with our students and help them get the direct instruction they need to achieve those goals.
Just a quick question, maybe when you were Frank Weinstauss's, but what's the communication between Gillington and Guilford over on the apps? Looking at the students that are going to come in from their 8th grade into our freshman class.
We don't have access to their NECAP results for confidentiality reasons, so I communicate with Deb Bergeron on that. We have the same criteria for their students that are entering into our high school that we do, especially in the area of math placement. We have math meetings actually this month with Gillington, their 7th and 8th grade math teachers, our 7th and 8th grade, and our high school teachers, Lori and myself. Those are done quite often, and then we have, usually twice a year, we meet with the language arts teachers from the middle schools and the high school will meet. We just had a modern language group maybe 3 weeks ago. They meet yearly. We do a lot of communication via email, but there is a constant open communication with the teachers and with there.
Plus, we know that Gillington is unpacking those standards. They work with a consultant. We learned about that in our administrative meetings when we get together. Certainly, they're working on similar objectives and agendas with their students as we are. They're just perhaps going about it a little bit differently, but I know that they were very pleased with some of the work that they were doing. Pardon me, I forget the consultant's name, but they did some very thank you very much. Very serious work in unpacking those standards and relating classroom instruction to that process, which it's all on the same standards, which is the good news.
And they bring their work products, and we bring our work products, and we compare. And the math teachers are just wonderful. And okay, what is it that you guys need this year? Where are our students falling down this year, so we know we can beef it up next year for you. And that goes across the board.
Ken, I've asked you this question a number of times, maybe not in the last year or so, but actually this is going to be for all 3 principals, because one of my concerns has always been, particularly since we have small schools, so just a relatively small number of students blowing off the kneecap can really mess up your aggregate scores. And I know you've discussed some of the measures that you've taken to try to encourage students to perform as well as possible on the kneecaps. What is your gut feeling, and Marcia and Jack, what are your gut feelings on the student attitude toward the kneecaps, and how many, because as Dick, you mentioned, you thought you identified a number of students who you think did not really apply themselves. So what do you think about that?
It'll vary from year to year, but I think that this year we might have had, depending on the test, and that's going to be my point. I went through the writing test, and I saw the kids who were on the cusp scores, and we probably had 15 kids who I think should have scored proficient. They were 1 point short of scoring proficient. The writing and the reading tests are given on the same day. The reading test is a writing test in its own right. There's a lot of short answer, several sentences to answer the reading question. I think our kids fatigue. I think they get, they put the pencil down. They're kind of fried at the end of that, that second session. And but I don't think I think that we're down to a real, fewer than 10 kids who don't give us some kind of effort on that test. And every year we are surprised by kids who are scoring 3s and 4s because they're not doing that in the classroom. And we go, wow, it has been there all along.
But even 10 is still, you know,
Yeah.
8-9%
Right.
of the class, so that still can significantly skew your scores.
But there's a lot of, you know, when I talk to kids, there's a lot of reasons. Some of them, it's an authority thing. Some of it's what's going on in their lives that day thing. Some of it is just hate school, you know.
It's what makes it difficult when you take one test and put so much emphasis on it. It makes it really difficult. And the SAT exam is just as a difficult exam for some of those students, you know. So I mean, when you start looking at these tests, what's going on in a given day plays a lot in, you know.
I mean, I don't know if there is a perfect solution for it, but it's just, it's a concern.
It's not a high-stakes test for the student.
Right,
So
right.
they don't need to pass it to graduate.
Right.
So,
I know.
Scores
Yeah,
are
we've
there
talked about
4
putting in a
times.
I think you are putting them in
You
the
do put on the
transcripts,
transcript, yes.
But it doesn't go towards the overall graduation
No,
requirement.
right. And if you're not really looking very far into your future, that's irrelevant to you, that it's on the transcript.
Marcia, what's your feel?
We've made scheduling changes as to how the recap testing sessions are presented. We made some of those changes last year and continue with them this year to create an environment where our kids, where they're younger and they actually respond differently, where they see this as a part of the total package. The kneecap standing on its own is a one-day experience, and unless you relate that to what they're doing in their learning and create that as part of it, then they will be apt, as they get older, to be less interested, not so much so as when they're younger. If you go down into 6th and 5th grade or whatever, they tend to often respond wanting to do well because they want to do well and their teacher wants them to do well. So we're really trying to create a more defined culture where being successful in school is important, and it's for everybody, not just some kids. And that's where the idea of showing powerful examples of what the best work is for all students to see then allows them to be part of that, be part of what Kate described as her goal setting process. So although we will have some students typically at 8th grade, but you can have them younger than that who could decide that not today, not any day, I'm really not interested in this. We have a little bit less of a battle with that, but the good news is we can look at that. We can talk about what we can do next year to engage those students more. And I think part of changing that scheduling and testing environment said to our students, gee, this must be more important than whatever. We've shut down the whole school to do that all at once. That creating that culture though of the significance for everybody, especially those the socioeconomic group, to really make that accessible for everyone is an important part of what we're doing.
So what's your gut feeling in terms of percentage or you know, how many kids do you think you've got?
They just don't care?
Yeah, or just not really applying themselves.
In the test itself?
In the
I
test.
would say a very small percentage. That's funny, we have not.
Under 5% or?
You know, I might, the way I feel about that, I might say under 5%. I don't know that that's accurate, Kurt, and that would be a great question for us to ask. We didn't have, when we debriefed on the recaps, we did not have a lot of people saying, gee, my kids didn't even care, they blew through the test. In fact, we processed it, but you had to go back and use the time. So you couldn't just whip through and be done without someone interacting with you and sending you back to recheck your answers. But that's a great question for us to ask. And again, that's kind of a gut feeling as we're looking and then comparing it to the test data.
The changes between 5th and 8th grade are really different too.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, and I think we did look at specifically, especially with writing and so forth, the schedule, you know, the fatigue and so forth, that seemed to be more of an issue than students just blowing off the class, per se. Like, wouldn't you agree that was more of the schedule itself and how arduous it might be or not, and so.
Another thing we were able to do with the kneecap testing is kids who the previous year the teachers thought they blew it off. I had one kid who wrote on every open answered question, I have no idea, I have no idea, I really have no idea, through the whole test. So the next year, when it came time for kneecaps, they gave that name to the 7th grade teachers, and they made sure she was in a small group setting, with someone going by every once in a while to say, how are you doing? Are you answering all your questions? You know, you can't give them any information, but you can give them that constant encouragement. So if we see a kid in the middle school who's behaving like that, we can put them in a small group where they're like 1 on 3, 1 adult and 3 kids, so they get that encouragement and they don't do that. You know, you can even say to them, you know better than that, write a real answer, you know, but if you don't see that until you collect their tests, there's not much you can do.
And the other thing we can do when we see that is there are many accommodations for all students. And if you have a student that you know gets easily frustrated after so many questions, that student, their accommodation would be take a short break with a teacher. So they can, you know, put down their pencil, walk around the building, go outside, whatever they need to do, and then come back and refocus. But like Kate said, you don't necessarily know that until the next year. So, and that's a piece of the communication that we also have now with having cross grade level meetings so that we can have those conversations.
And another change, if I could just put that out there, is the idea that there are certain things that everybody is supposed to know at the grade level. It's not negotiable. Those are the critical things. And so we're beginning also to talk to our students in those terms. These are the things that everybody's supposed to know, not just some kids. And so when you don't know them, then these are the strategies we're going to use, and we're actually embarking on implementing different strategies for that, so that the kids are beginning to understand, if you don't know this, you actually have to spend more time working on it to learn it. If I did blow it off and I do know it, I better show them that I know it, because if I don't, I'm going to have to spend this extra time to learn it. It's not the competency model of the high school, but it's definitely that integrating step of what it is you need to know and be able to do. That's what we're talking about in the competency. So establishing the same thing for middle school kids, and establishing a level of performance. What is mastery? Is 70% mastery? Well, no, it's not. What do we mean by mastery? And then helping kids understand that.
And having those discussions with the kids when we get their kneecap report and their report card, and saying, you know, you're not doing as much as you should be doing.
And Jack?
I don't type that.
My fingers are numb.
You know what you're gonna say.
I don't want to do
Type
this,
it
I don't want to do
afterwards.
this anymore. On the elementary level, it's really not an issue of motivation. What you hear most often from this age group is, this is really hard, this is really hard, which is actually a testament that they're actually trying. So I would say very rarely, unless it's specific to a child's disability, that could be opposition to planning.
Right.
And in fact, we actually have a child that is so diagnosed, and he had a 45-minute test on one day. I was the only one with flexibility to provide for him. So I did one-on-one with him, and took him 4 hours and 10 minutes to finish the test, but he did. And that included going out and taking a couple of walks and having a snack and so forth. So I would say that they see the test as hard, but they see it as an admirable task that they want to complete, and they try their hardest for it.
And that mindset is following them up.
The other thing that we have a luxury of is, because of the amount of staff that we have, and we're testing on 2 grade levels, we test only 1 grade level at a time, which allows us to flex as many paras and case managers and so forth as possible. So we have a whole staff supporting 4th grade, and the whole staff supporting 3rd grade. So when we really have to do one-on-one for a small group, we actually have the staff to do that. Somebody remind me that we take it.
Sandy, just a quick question on goal setting. When students are engaged with teaching and goal setting, does that apply to the elementary level and the low levels of elementary school as well? And how do you go about that whole process of goal setting? And how do you assess if that works?
We don't use, what Kate was talking with the goal setting using the NEWA, we don't use NEWA in its place, we use Success Maker.
Yeah.
So when we look at our assessment, we do quote pre-testing on different skills, And then the kids actually will get a chance to look at their pre-test, see where they were, and then see their growth with their post-test. In place of the NEWA in the elementary school, we use success makers. So we're really looking at the kids and seeing the growth that they have on specific skills. So our goal setting is much more informal, because it's hard for a student, especially at a primary level, but even in the 3rd and 4th grade, to be able to look at those numbers, make sense of what those numbers mean, and to set those goals. So we look more at specific skills and goal setting that route than with the test scores.
How about middle and high?
I think in the middle school, the goal setting works wonderfully, because they come, some of them are jumping up and down with their growth, and so that was huge. I understand, I got a strange. I didn't give a test without having that. On the kneecap, it's harder, because you don't have that data print that's so easily printed out on each student of what they've done spring to fall to winter, year to year. But on the NEWA test, I think the goal setting is huge.
And I think what's a nice piece about the prescriptive assessment that we have within the schools, whether it be the NEWA in the middle school and the high school, or Success Maker within the elementary school, is that it's more continuous, it's constant. The kids with the NEWA, they're taken either 2 or 3 times each year, and with Success Maker, our students are in there twice a week. So that data is more valid to us on a consistent basis than the kneecap, which we get once a year.
And I was going to get the goal making or goal setting in the middle school for what I do at least. I actually take the data we get from NWA and break it down where, this is where you are now, so you score for 210, and it gives a range. And it says, this is what you're really good at. Like, just right where you are. This is what you've mastered on one side, and this is where you are, and this is what it looks like moving forward, where you're going. And then I kind of put number values on that so that the goals are not random numbers. So if they have a 210, they aren't like, I want a 275 next time. They're like, oh, so this next column on the right, this is where I'm moving toward, and that's within this range. That looks hard. And they go through and talk about all of these bulleted points. Oh yeah, that's it. So on the right there, the future skills, like that looks really hard to them. They don't understand it. They know that maybe that this is something they're going to on the lower end of their goal. They're not going to be right up at the top. It says for a score of 211 to 220. I tell them their exact score from last time. I don't remember usually. And I'll say your exact score is this middle column here. And this next score is the next 10-point increment. So from a 220 to 230. How hard, let's talk about what it is, what it means. If you totally understand all of that, then you've set a pretty high goal for yourself. But that way they're very aware of what it means to have that goal. It's not just a number they throw out there. I talk to them about average growth and that most people do not grow 25, 30 points next time they take it. It's like 6 points. So let's be reasonable. It's, it seems to work. I also then have them go through and talk about the skills and how do I know? How do you know it? How do you know? I look at each column and they answer the same questions. What activities and assignments have you ever done to show that you know those things? Because if you can't relate back what that means, they don't get it. And I say, go back to 4th grade, go back to 6th grade. What have you done that's related? They can't think of anything. And I say, well, then you did really well in that because you don't recognize that skill in yourself. We need to work on that. And then recognize things you have not worked on and you need to start working on. And they kind of set goals that way too. What are skills I need to do so that I can meet my goal? Not just know what it is and set a number, but have to get it.
The teachers will sit down with youngsters individually and work through them.
Yeah, usually the first time I'll do this with them because they're very like, I don't know. I don't know what activity I did, and we'll talk about it. Remember, each one has a standard we talk about, and this is how, I talk them through it. But the second time they do it, they understand and they can fill it out.
We're really also in math and in literacy courses working at this common language. Part of the problem for kids at the middle level is they get to look at something like that and they're unclear what it means because we have not made it as clear as we could. So we're using words like analyze. We're having kids talk about those words. We're using it with 10-year-olds, not that analyze couldn't be used, but we're making sure that we're consistently using words about learning, words about writing, words about science, language arts, that they are words that the kids are going to hear 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade, because if you don't have those words, you can't access that next level of skill. So if you go into a science classroom you will see a banner in every science classroom with a set of important words that teachers are using consistently at all grade levels. A lot of common work for word walls and common work for language arts teachers. So those things also are helping kids in that goal-setting process, because they're actually, what we believe is they're actually going to get more capable because they're using those words constantly. If I can give an example of a math class of 5th grade, piggybacks on the learning of these skills. You can go into the 5th grade math class where you met me as the teacher, and if we were running a video from September to now, you can see Linda shifting her practice and shifting the words she's using and shifting in that classroom, and you can see the kids following suit. They're using words that from Mahesh's training and all the math discussions, they're now operating in that way. They're using the words, they're doing things, and you can really see that difference. And sadly, we should have videoed it because we could have shown that time lapse.
If I could bounce off that, when Susan and I were looking at math analysis on individual test items and so forth, we looked at items that we were surprised that students were getting wrong, and as we began to talk to the students, they knew, when we told them what the question asked forward, the response was, oh, that's what they wanted to know? Because the vocabulary that was on the test did not correspond to the vocabulary that was in the textbook, which did not correspond to the vocabulary the teachers were using in the classroom. So we worked really hard with Shiner as a consultant to not only make that vocabulary common, but we literally now interchange those words all the time, sum, dividend, and so forth, so that they realize that there are different labels that mean the same thing. It doesn't prevent them from trying to follow.
I think the goal setting is really an important thing for kids to learn early on, not just for test scores, but for, for their career goals and so on. But, what was it, Yogi Berra that said, if you don't know where you're going, you may not get there?
There's a fork in the road, take it.
Thank you to our teachers and principals.
Well, I don't think we're done yet. I was just,
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, at least I have some more questions.
Okay,
I
well,
mean,
if you have any questions of program or specific questions to report?
actually, I've got some questions on the results now. Just looking at, I mean, first of all, I appreciate the effort you put into providing all this data. I like the way, having it broken into grade by grade and then following a certain cohorts of kids as they, I think that was very useful, very informative. And being an engineer, I like numbers and trends and things like that. So I do have a few questions. I don't know if other folks do also.
If you could tell me which report that you have a question on, we can pull it up so that we can pinpoint what you're
Okay,
looking
well,
at.
first we could start with
Okay.
the summary that you gave us at the last meeting. I think as I looked at the summary, it is good news.
Is that, yeah?
Oh, I'm starting off the reading.
Okay.
Because as I look at this and, I see that basically for the most part, we are consistently above the state average. We're consistently, above the state averages of the other kneecap states, Rhode Island and Vermont and Maine. The things that tend to concern me a little bit is, like, for example, the reading score at the elementary school from 2009 to 2010 drops. And I'm wondering, so what do you do when you see that? And what do you think that's an indicator of?
Well, this report first doesn't measure the same group of students from year to year. So
I
the first
understand that.
thing
This is, right, this is the
right.
overall.
And these are students, is this in grade, this is at Guilford Elementary School. So the first thing that we would do is go back and look at we would look at two things. We would look at the student growth report, and we would look at which students didn't meet that target. And then we would look at the particular strands and find out which strand we fell down in. Was it word identification? Was it vocabulary? We would also go back and look at the individual questions. One of the things that when Lori and I were looking at the math items this year, something that was happening with the elementary school students, the 3rd and 4th grade students, is that they were answering the first part of the question. They would look at the first part of the question, they would see the answer to that, and they would bubble that. there were some instances where 80% of the students answered the question wrong with the same answer, and that answer was applicable to only the first part of the question. So that's another thing that we'll look at is the actual items, and is there a strategy that we need to go over with the students? Is this a knowledge or a skill base, or is this a test taking strategy? With the reading and the writing, we're looking a lot at the open response, and one thing that Katie's doing is looking at the questions, and then, like she talked about them, this is a 0, this is a 1, this is a 2, this is a 3, 4, and then going over that with the students. So that's where we would go from that. That would flag to us, we would pull that information, and we would go from there.
I mean, clearly, as I look at this, what you want to see is you want to see improvement on a year-to-year basis. And I guess just to clarify, do we just kind of throw out 2008? Because that was that year that we had some inconsistencies, or, because that kind of messes up your trend analysis.
It does.
You got to study a little.
Because we don't really know what we should have had for numbers there.
We threw it out from the perspective of whether there are any numbers or not, but that didn't separate that we looked at specific items for pervasive trends. So while it was an administrative issue, the content was still an important issue for us to look at. But I also like on what Sandy said, and I have a problem ethically with what I'm going to share, but it persists in this type of test. When you have 9 and 10-year-olds sitting to take a test, and you construct a test item, where in the design of the test item, answer A that's offered is intentionally by design in close proximity to the actual answer, it tests students' impulsivity and not their content. So when Sandy was speaking, I found 4 items on the test last year that in excess of 64% of the time students marked it wrong, but with 88% frequency responding to the same wrong answer. And when you look at the answer, in general, qualitatively it made sense, but in specific quantitative it did not make sense. So that gets very frustrating because that appears on a regular basis on a test. Secondly is that some test items, I think we're up to 28% now, is that right, Ken? 28% of any test on 1 year is gone the next year.
Yes.
So they put in new sample test items, and some of the test items are actually there specifically for the purpose of testing the validity of the test item. But that data goes in. So now when you're dealing with 64 students taking a test and you have both of those statistical anomalies, now you do what everybody in this room has talked about is you go and you look at the individual students' test, you look at their individual answers, you look at it in relationship to what they know, and you say, we're going to dismiss those items as anomalies of that test administration. We're going to look at these because this is the content that they really didn't understand, and that's what we need to teach to. And I'm not trying to say that the test is invalid, I'm just trying to say that from that test construct perspective, when you're dealing with 9 and 10-year-olds, you have to consider that that skews their scores. Where when you get older students, you can actually teach them not to be impulsive on that answer and to sort of get out, so it becomes not as central an issue. That doesn't mean that you don't still deal with the issue, but just not to the degree that sometimes we have.
Another question, going back to 2008.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my understanding that was primarily an elementary school issue.
Correct.
Because I also noticed, like, for the reading in 2008, the high school made a large jump, and then it was drifted down a little bit, now going back up. I'm just wondering about, is it?
That aberration was only at the elementary school.
Right, so,
That's just because we had three different sets of kids.
right. I mean, clearly what I'm looking for is a nice improvement, and I think for the most part that's what we've got. I'm just wondering, how much difference do you think is acceptable from year to year? Granted, because it's different groups of kids, particularly when you're looking at the aggregate.
I'm more concerned about trends, if next year's class does better than this year's class, I'm happy about that, but that doesn't mean we suddenly got it right. If the year after that does better than that year, then I start to feel good about that we've made the modifications we need to make.
Well, and again, that's why if you see improvement, a steady improvement from year to year, that indicates that we are doing it.
But if I saw a steady decline, that would trigger the same reaction. Down a couple points, I use the mean skill score a lot. If we go from an 1148 to an 1147, I don't worry about that. If we continue to decline, I would start to get worried about, I think sometimes in the high school, we've been so focused on raising our math scores that we've been a little bit complacent about reading and writing, because we thought we had that pretty well squared away. It's time to turn our attention back to those two disciplines, and give them the same focus that we had for math. So that's part of our, as I watch math go up, I see the slight tick down. It's ever so slight. But when you go to a gap analysis, when you study the various groups, what concerns me is we have, our regular ed kids are increasing, but our IEP kids, we're getting a little alligator going on with our scores, and that's very disconcerting because these kids are trending down while the rest of, we seem to be doing it right in the rest of the school. And that happened very suddenly this year with the SES kids. We've seen it in the IEP kids, but now with the SES kids. They were climbing with us, and then all of a sudden they fell off the cliff this year. So we need to pay very close attention to next year's scores and see what they indicate.
Well, and that's what makes it so difficult, because each year you need a different
And the
groups and a composition, how many IEPs, how many,
right.
Yeah.
One year you might have 20% of kids on free reduced lunch, and the next year you might have 25% of your kids on free reduced. And those things are not factored, all you get is a percentage of kids proficient, non-proficient.
If I can add to, our issue is that all our students at a grade level had one teacher. And so if there's a disruption for that teacher, let's say maternity leave or something like that, we know that we have to watch to see how that impacted our students, and then talk about what we may need to do in the following year because that disruption happened. Things like that happen, and we don't have another person that can even support a decent sub that comes in. So that's one of those issues too that plays out as we have conversations about what to do in the following year if we notice that in the data.
I think there is a misconception that our students are not achieving at the state average, and that's not true. We do achieve at a higher average than the state.
Well, I mean, that's what these charts clearly indicate,
Yeah.
that in most years, in most areas, we are significantly above the state average and significantly above the average of the other NECAP states, at least as I read it. The shocking thing is the high school math is so low across the board of the percentage of students reaching proficiency, L3 or L4. Is that just an indication of are they unrealistic standards, or are we really that bad at math?
No, I'll take you to answer that question.
I'd say almost a little both.
I think it is, again, I'll go back to it's a very difficult test. It's given early in the high school student's career. So it measures a curriculum that not every high school student has gotten to. Especially if they've the irony is, if they've struggled with math, then they definitely didn't get to the aspects of the curriculum that are going to be on the test, which just compounds their difficulty with the test. But I also think it indicates, in K-12, that we have, not reinforced certain concrete skills, so that when they get into the more difficult forms of math, they've got some things down that, should be like this. And they're still trying to, as Dick asks every student in our school when he meets them, what's 2/3 plus 5/5? Or something like that. They're still struggling with that, and, that's not necessarily a high school skill.
Well, it's a societal problem too, and we talked about this and that.
Because we excuse math.
It's acceptable for people to say, I'm horrible at math.
Yes.
The person wouldn't readily admit, I can barely read. That would be, a point of shame. People will say, I'm horrible at math, and everybody chuckles and says, it's okay, when it really isn't. And that's a societal problem that we have to address.
But on the math, I would be very interested in seeing 2 years down the road, the Shama recommendations, the non-negotiable items that kids have to learn